What's up, my friends? Welcome to a brand new video. U.S. Army veteran ThatChrisChaos. Now, perhaps you're interested in joining the United States military and you want to know what things could potentially disqualify me from being able to join whichever branch it is of service that you're interested in joining. Well, hopefully I can facilitate that with some education for you to tell you about some things that are potential disqualifiers, but there's some things you need to be aware of. There are always these things called waivers where potentially a disqualifying factor could be waiverable if you meet the criteria, if the military really needs someone in that particular job or whatever the case might be. That is really a case-by-case basis, so I can't really tell you if you would qualify for a waiver, if you don't qualify for a waiver for this particular thing, because it really just depends on you and specifically that time period as far as whether or not the military is really needing of people in that situation. Now, if you're new to this channel, that's the type of content I like to provide. Stuff about the Army specifically, because like I said, I was an Army veteran, but also sometimes some things just about the military in general. So if that's the type of content you're interested in, maybe consider hitting that subscribe button, even hitting on that bell to join the notification platoon so you can get alerts as soon as new videos go live, including when I do live streams. So we're gonna talk about those disqualifiers, but another thing to kind of keep in mind is that use this video for reference, for a little bit of research, maybe research other things outside of this video from other people or online, different outlets or whatever, but the main thing is always talk to a military recruiter to get the final word. Don't just be like, oh, I saw this guy on YouTube who said that, this was a disqualifier, so I'm not even gonna try to join because he said I can't join. No, just make sure you do a little bit more research, but also mainly talk to a military recruiter. Now, I am gonna start off with some really basic disqualifiers and kind of move up a little bit from there to certain other ones that are maybe a little bit beyond the basic ones. But the key thing I want you to know is that I'm not listing every single disqualifier. There's probably a ton of disqualifiers. So again, use this as guidelines, but also do your own research as well. First one we're gonna talk about is age. Now, for the military, I know especially for the Army, it's I think the same for other branches as well, but don't quote me on that. But for the Army at least anyways, 17 to 33 for enlisted duty. So enlisted personnel have to be between the age of 17 and they cannot turn 33 until they've already in the military, actually already in the Army. 17 is kind of still has some requirements with it. You have to have like a parent consent and sign off on some stuff, but 18 you don't have to have any of that stuff. But the 33 thing, like I said, if you are joining at 32, then you have to get into the military before you're gonna turn 33. Officers have to commission before they turn the age of 34. So that is a basic requirement of joining, but being outside of those windows can potentially be a disqualifier. So if you're 15, you can't join, right? That is something you can't waive, right? If you're too young. If you're too old, sometimes, yeah, you can have waivers for that. You're 35, 36 or whatever, you might potentially qualify for a waiver. The other military branches have different age limits as well. So like Air Force and Marines and everything. So make sure you check those out if you're interested in those other branches outside of the Army. But if you're 15 and you're hoping to get a waiver to join the Army or the military early, that's not gonna happen. But usually for being a little bit older, being past that age requirement, that sometimes can be waiverable. Education is another thing. They have the basic requirements of education to be able to join the United States military. That is having a high school diploma or an equivalent. So that could be a GED, that could be you later got your diploma, whatever the case is. But if you dropped out of high school, didn't go and get any kind of high school diploma equivalent, then you do not qualify to join the United States military. As far as your citizenship can possibly be a disqualifier. So that one gets a little bit trickier, right? If you are wanting to be an enlisted soldier, then you must have at least a green card and be a resident of the United States. This is a common thing I get from a lot of people. They are wanting to join the United States military from another country and they want to join and they don't understand that they need to be a resident of the United States. It's the US military. It's not the world military, the US military. So that means you need to live in the United States and be a legal resident. So whether that's from a green card or you go through the whole steps of getting your citizenship, either way, you need to be a US resident with either a green card or a US citizen. For officers, it is different as you must be a US citizen to be either a commissioned officer or a warrant officer. And now one last kind of basic one is the ASVAB, right? You take the ASVAB, there is a certain requirement for each branch of the military. If you fail to meet those standards, that is a disqualifier, but that is also a waiverable one. I have seen that before where people failed the ASVAB, they just couldn't pass that dang thing, but the military, that specific branch was really desperate, really in need of people into this specific job. So they were like, yeah, we're gonna go ahead and waive your ASVAB scores and you can still get in. But be aware that just because you fail it doesn't necessarily mean you will automatically just I'll just go the waiver route. Now it's still case by case basis and needs of the military at that time. So potentially, sometimes failing the ASVAB can be a disqualifier. Now we're gonna move outside of the basic requirements for joining the military, right? Some things that are maybe more along the lines of maybe criminal or medical or certain other factors that could potentially, again, I emphasize potentially disqualify you from the military, because sometimes there could be a waiver available to get you in the military even if you have something that I mentioned that says it's a disqualifier. Sorry if I'm stressing this waiver thing a lot, because if I don't, there's gonna be someone in the comment section that's gonna be like, no, you said this disqualifies you from the military, but I knew somebody who had that. Well, yeah, maybe it's because they got a waiver for it, so I'm trying to stress that. So if you are someone who has received a felony, that is something that is typically a disqualifier for you. There is a such thing as felony waivers, but again, sometimes it just depends on what the felony was for. If you are someone who has been convicted of domestic violence, that is a disqualifier. Typically, someone who has been convicted of domestic violence is not allowed to possess a weapon, so now you can't, hold a weapon in the United States military, so that's a disqualifier, and it'll disqualify you from being able to join. Also, if you are currently under investigation, pending a trial, whatever the case is, that can disqualify you as well, because they're not going to let you join the military and then go take a break, for a little bit so that you can go to this trial and potentially be convicted of murder or whatever, the trial could be possibly for. So if you have something currently going on where you're under investigation, potentially, being looked at for charges, or you're awaiting trial or whatever, you're gonna have to wait until all that's settled and taken care of. Being overweight is usually a disqualifier for that individual, but there's a lot more factors that kind of go involved with that as well. There is a specific standard for height and weight for men and women, so if you are this specific height, then they have a specific bracket as far as your minimum weight and your maximum weight, and you must be between those. There are factors in there for like if you're over that weight, but it's because of muscle, then there's this other factor of where they have to tape you to make sure that your body fat percentage is not above the allowance that is allocated for your specific age bracket and everything like that. So that has to factor in it as well. Being underweight though, you're gonna have to put on some weight. So if you are underweight, then yeah, you're gonna be disqualified until you can gain some weight. That one's a little bit more rare. There are some cases of that, but that's a little bit more rare. It's more common that if someone has a problem with weight, as far as being overweight, then they have to just drop the pounds or maybe trim down some of that fat to where now they've gotten into the range of where they can, be taped and pass the weight standards, but maybe they're still over that weight standard because of the muscle they put on. Tattoos can be a disqualifier for the military based on where they're located at, what type of tattoos they are, a lot of factors based on that branch of service and what their regulations are based on tattoos. As an example, for the Army, you can't have anything from the collar and up, and you can't have anything on your hands. Also, you can't have any type of tattoos that could be somehow racist, discriminatory against a group or whatever, somehow offensive, whatever the case might be. Those can sometimes be waiverable. I know for the Army, I've seen people that have come into the Army where they had like a small tattoo on their hand, maybe a small tattoo that came up their neck a little bit, whatever the case might have been, and they were able to get a waiver for it. But it really, again, it's gonna go back to that whole example I talked about before, case by case basis. If you're probably like really tattooed all the way up your hand and a bunch of tattoos up your neck and on your face, yeah, you're probably not gonna need a waiver for that. But sometimes certain other, smaller things may be waiverable. Now I'm gonna get into a little bit of the medical stuff, but medical is a really complicated one. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about some of the medical ones, but that one's a really tough one to kind of cover because it really sometimes just depends on a doctor's evaluation and the severity of whatever it is that you're curious about, as far as the severity of it and a lot of other factors, but I'm gonna kind of touch base on some of those factors. A common one I get asked is asthma. That sometimes just depends on the severity of the asthma, but typically, if someone has been diagnosed with asthma after their 13th birthday, that can potentially be a disqualifier, but again, medical examination could potentially kind of waiver that or whatever the case might be, but you definitely probably gonna have a little bit of a challenge if you were diagnosed with asthma after your 13th birthday and it's something you're currently doing where you have to use like an inhaler or something like that. There's probably gonna be some challenges. Hearing loss can be a disqualifier. It depends on the severity of the hearing loss, but if you are deaf, obviously that is a disqualifier. That is not something you're gonna be able to get a waiver for. But if you have hearing loss to a certain degree in one ear, both ears, whatever the case might be, it depends on the severity of that. So if you have hearing problems, you have to get evaluated to determine if it is beyond the threshold of what they allow and potentially either be disqualified or be good, maybe with a waiver or just good in general. As far as vision, typically 20/20 vision, whether that is with corrective lenses or without corrective lenses, you're typically good and you qualify for service in the military. If your vision is so bad that even with corrective lenses, you can't get to 20/20, then yeah, that's most likely going to be a disqualifier. Now, when it comes to ADD and ADHD, that typically used to be a disqualifier. Now it kind of has lightened up a little bit as far as the Army standards, I know at least. I don't know about for other branches, but for the Army, they more care about if you're someone who has been treated with ADHD or ADD within the last year and also had to use like medication to treat it. So if you are someone who has within the last year been treated for ADHD or ADD, then possibly it could be a disqualifier, but again, still kind of goes based on a medical evaluation. If you're currently being like evaluated for like some kind of medical condition or something like that, that could potentially be a disqualifier as well, as they don't want you to go and join the military and then while you're in basic training or your initial training, something that happens kind of makes that condition even worse because it hasn't been treated yet and all that kind of stuff like that. So those potentially can be disqualifiers. Things like maybe you're not sure if you have a serious illness. As of recording this video, COVID plays a factor in there. So things that, if you're kind of still in the process of kind of working out some kind of possible disease or something that's contagious or something like that, that is something you have to take care of first before you'll be eligible to join the military. Now, there are a ton of other medical things that could potentially disqualify you that also could potentially have waiver options as well, but that comes down to just being medically evaluated by someone, right? So a lot of times people ask, something like mental conditions, maybe it's autism or something like that, right? A lot of times it just depends on the severity of that, and that has to come from a medical evaluator. Another factor that can potentially disqualify you from joining the military is if you're a single parent. That mainly applies for active duty individuals. If you're looking for National Guard, Reserve, something along those lines, probably not a disqualifier. But if you're looking for active duty and you are a single parent, that can potentially be a disqualifier. The main thing with that is because now you don't have anybody to look after your child while you're in basic training, you could potentially have a loved one look after it, but then there's other things that could potentially get you pulled from basic training because now you need to look after your child or whatever because maybe that loved one, got sick or whatever the case was, right? So there's a lot of things they just don't want to deal with and a lot of other factors that kind of involve with that. So if you're looking for active duty and you're a single parent, probably not going to be an option. Also, kind of along those lines, let's say you have a spouse that is in the military and you want to join the military. Well, if you have children, that's not going to really be able to happen very easily. That can potentially make it to where you can't join. If you're looking for, again, Reserves or National Guard, then sometimes you have to have a really strong family care plan involved with it and they will approve it. But if you are looking to go active duty, your spouse is active duty, and you have children, that's most likely a big chance it's going to be a disqualifier. Now, if your spouse is in the military and you are a civilian and you want to join but you don't have any children, then that's probably not a problem. Now let's talk about some things that are not waiverable. These are things that at least the Army says that you cannot get a waiver for. If you are currently on parole, on confinement of some sort, maybe it's house arrest or whatever, if you are currently on probation, you are not eligible to join the military, and that is not something that you can get a waiver for. If you have been convicted of a serious offense 3 times or more, that's not waiverable. I'm not talking about like traffic violations or those kind of things adding up. I'm talking about serious offenses that have been convicted of 3 or more times, no waiver possible for you, no options. The Army also says anyone who is found distributing, selling, or trafficking narcotics, that includes marijuana and anything else that is considered a narcotic, is not eligible for enlistment and is also not eligible for a waiver. If you have been convicted of driving while intoxicated, whether that's from alcohol, drugs, whatever the case might be, 3 or more times, not eligible for a waiver. Also, a key note to kind of mention, if you get 1 DUI in the Army, that can result in you getting kicked out of the Army. If you're curious about misdemeanors, well, if you have been convicted of 5 misdemeanors or more, you are not eligible for a waiver. And one last one is if you cannot pass a drug test, you are not eligible for waiver. There is no waiver that will allow you to get into the military, to get into the Army, to get into any branch of service if you cannot pass a drug test. So a lot of information that I covered right there, but also a lot of information that I probably didn't cover. So if you have questions, leave those down in the comment section. I will do my best to answer the ones that I possibly can. Maybe other viewers can pick up the slack on certain other ones here or there, but again, the real person you need to talk to if you have serious questions that are determining whether you can join the military, you need to talk to a military recruiter. If you go and you start asking me, hey, I have this specific skin condition or whatever like that, I may be able to speculate on possibly whether or not you may have a harder time joining or not joining, but it automatically just kind of comes down to what the recruiter says, what a medical examiner says for medical type of situations to determine if you can join the military or not. But use this video as a great reference, right? To get the ball rolling, get the thought process kind of going as far as, am I gonna have a harder time trying to join the military because of this or that or whatever? Or does it sound like maybe, you know, I'm meeting those criterias and I'm pretty good and I can have a little bit more of a smoother transition into the United States military? Now, if you're looking to join the United States Army, but you're not sure what job you want to do in the Army, I got a video right here that kind of talks about how to kind of, you know, get that process going a little bit better and kind of help you figure out maybe what you should do or what would line up with your goals. If you haven't seen my latest video, it's right here for you. So if you haven't seen that, check it out. Links are in the description box down below. I'm ThatChrisChaos. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time. See ya.